You wouldn't think a truck could be too good for the law, but Britain's history of haulage is littered with machines that pushed every boundary engineers could find, and sometimes broke the law just by existing. These weren't rusty wrecks or dodgy rebuilds, they were full-blooded British creations that tested what was possible until the rulebook snapped shut. The Scammell Crusader 6x6 prototype was one of them, a Cold War experiment that should never have left the factory gates. Its triple-axle chassis and permanent all-wheel drive gave it pulling power far beyond anything on the road. The Cummins V8 under the cab roared like artillery, shoving out enough torque to twist prop shafts and shear universal joints during test climbs. It looked unstoppable, but on tarmac it was chaos. Brakes overheated, turning circles rivaled buses, and road vibrations cracked welds in the subframe. DVLA inspectors watched one trial and walked away shaking their heads. No chance. It was too heavy, too long, too powerful. The surviving rig was quietly parked behind a military depot and stripped for spares, a monster too wild for the motorway. Then came the ERF NGC, or better known as Night Grit Chucka, Britain's most over-engineered snow fighter. Built during the brutal winters of the early 80s, it carried twin salt spreaders, a 14-litre Cummins diesel, and a driveline that could power the rear axles in reverse. The idea was brilliant: back up icy hills while still spreading grit, but in practice it terrified operators. Fully loaded, it weighed more than 52 tons and could slide backwards under its own throttle. Reports of jackknifing and runaway reversing reached the Department of Transport, which rewrote HGV regulations in 1983 to ban powered reverse propulsion altogether. Overnight, the NGC went from cutting edge to contraband. Councils locked them in yards, a few were converted into static salt bunkers, their engines removed but their legends intact. The Leyland Landtrain export 60-tonner was never meant for Britain at all. Designed for Africa and the Middle East, it had minimal emissions gear, near-zero driver comfort features, and a wheelbase long enough to need a football pitch to turn. But a British logistics firm accidentally imported half a dozen units through a misfiled export order and tried to register them. Customs called in the DVSA, and within a week the trucks were impounded. They failed every safety test thrown at them: lighting, emissions, braking, cab strength, you name it. 2 were crushed outright to make a point. The rest were sold for parts overseas. It became the textbook case of how not to handle global logistics paperwork. For Leyland, it was embarrassing. For truck historians, it's a thrilling what if. A machine too tough for Britain's roads, outlawed before anyone could see what it could do. Next was the Foden 525 Heavy Haul, a name whispered with both awe and regret. Foden wanted an icon, a British bruiser that could take on Scania V8s and American heavy haulers. So they fitted a Detroit diesel 8V92 two-stroke V8 pumping out more than 500 horsepower. The sound alone could wake villagers, but that engine's brutal torque shredded Foden's own chassis. Transmission mounts cracked. Gearboxes shifted under load and differential housings exploded during heavy pulls. One runaway on the M62 sealed its fate. A fully loaded test unit lost braking on descent and skidded half a mile before collapsing a trailer coupling. No one was hurt, but the investigation concluded inherent mechanical instability. Production was cancelled. The prototype was scrapped quietly at Sandbach. What should have been a flagship became the cautionary tale engineers whispered about for decades. And then there was the Atkinson Borderline, the rebel that nearly turned Britain's motorways into racetracks. Built in small numbers for government supply runs across Europe, it featured a secret gearbox override switch that disabled the 56 mph speed limiter and unleashed the full top end of its Rolls-Royce Eagle engine. The military loved it. Quick convoys, faster response times, but when a few surplus units slipped into civilian fleets, chaos followed. Drivers discovered the red switch within days, and suddenly these trucks were bombing up the M6 at 80 or 90 miles an hour with trailers in tow. Police radar couldn't believe it. Headlines read, "Atkinson lorry clocked at 84 mph. The backlash was instant. DVSA ordered a national recall, forced every gearbox to be replaced, and made electronic limiters mandatory across future fleets. Some Borderlines escaped the sweep and ended up in private collections, still fitted with the outlaw switch, relics of a time when speed and power mattered more than paperwork. Each of these machines tells the same story: engineers chasing strength, speed, and innovation faster than the law could keep up. Britain built them, tested them, and then, when they scared the regulators, quietly buried them. But the stories never died. There was nothing subtle about the Guy Big J Super Hauler. This wasn't a truck designed, it was unleashed. Built in the late 1970s for high-speed European freight runs, it featured a modified Rolls-Royce 320L engine with a tuned injection rack that pushed it well beyond legal power limits. On paper, it was capped at 280 bhp. In reality, some operators reported dyno results close to 350. It was never meant to be used on British roads at those levels. The torque curve alone could destroy leaf springs. Worse still, early units had no limiter, no retarder, and brakes borrowed straight from standard 32-ton rigs. The result was catastrophic fade on steep declines. After a crash on the Snake Pass involving an overloaded Big J, the Department of Transport classified the modified spec as non-compliant with commercial regulations, and Guy was forced to recall the lot. But not everyone complied. Some units vanished into yard collections, still hot, still ticking, waiting for someone mad enough to take them on a midnight run. Then there was the Seddon Atkinson urban tanker, better known by its nickname, the bomb truck. Designed in collaboration with the MOD, it carried highly flammable liquid fuel for RAF airfields. But when decommissioned, a handful of units were mistakenly released to civilian auctions without tank modifications. 2 were bought by scrap haulers who didn't realize what they had until the tanks ruptured during hot cutting. No one was hurt, but the fallout was fierce. New laws were pushed through almost overnight requiring full deactivation and inspection of ex-military tankers. The Seddon urban tanker became the poster child for bureaucratic oversight, and the public was warned. If you see one in a private fleet today, it's not just rare, it might be completely illegal to operate. The Foden S50 Roadtrain, on the other hand, broke rules in a very different way, by skipping them. Meant for export only, this V8-powered hauler somehow entered the UK market through a grey import scheme linked to a shipping firm out of Hull. With its unregulated emission system and non-EU compliant cab crash rating, it should have been impounded on arrival, but thanks to a paperwork error and a few swapped plates, it racked up over 20,000 miles on British roads before being pulled during a DVSA roadside check. The scandal exposed a loophole that allowed certain foreign-registered trucks to skirt safety standards for years. Foden had nothing to do with it, but the truck and the operator were blacklisted. To this day, you won't find a legitimate S50 Roadtrain with a UK registration. It was the ghost that haunted the system. Of all the outlaw trucks though, few carried the mystique of the Bedford TM 6x6, also known as Firestorm. A one-off designed for emergency military deployment during the Falklands era, it was equipped with a water-cooled V12 originally meant for amphibious craft. It had 4 fuel tanks, a low-ratio crawler box, and was rumored to hit 70 mm off-road. After its operational life ended, a private collector tried to re-register it as an agricultural unit, but the DVLA took one look at its armor-reinforced frame, flame-proof cab panels, and untested emissions kit, and said absolutely not. The Firestorm was banned from any public road use. It still exists, tucked away in a Wiltshire barn, occasionally fired up for shows and parades, but no amount of paperwork will ever make it legal. It was built for war, not Wolverhampton. And finally, the Leyland DAF 95 Super Modular, a prototype that broke every design convention of the time. Developed in the early 90s as part of a modular concept series, it featured swappable drivetrain pods, bolt-on cabin modules, and a rear steer axle meant to navigate tight European city zones. On paper, it was revolutionary. In practice, it was a regulatory nightmare. Every component fell into a different approval category. No 2 trucks shared the same emissions profile, brake calibration, or axle weight limits. The DVSA issued a stop-use notice after the first test model entered a London fleet trial. Leyland DAF pulled the plug soon after. Only 1 unit survived the shutdown, and even then, it was reclassified as experimental only, not road legal. Collectors have offered 6-figure sums to get their hands on it, but unless you're driving it across a private airfield or museum circuit, the law says no. That truck rewrote the rulebook and got buried under it. These weren't lawless death traps or backstreet builds, they were the bleeding edge, machines that engineers believed in so much, they forgot to ask if the law would keep up. And in each case, they were stopped not by failure, but by regulation. That's what makes them special. They didn't just break the rules, they rewrote them.